Thank you. Thank you very much. When listening to my colleagues, what is interesting is looking at standing with President Bush, with Obama, and I think actually Abraham Lincoln was president when I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And so my experience is very, very different. And I think about that in terms of why did I join Peace Corps? This was 1973. I joined, and at that point I didn't have a camera when I was a Peace Corps volunteer. Not only was there no cell phone service, there was no phone service. And so I didn't have a lot of photographs. And I thought about that as I was also watching the other presentations, because I didn't have that opportunity to capture what was going on. And maybe that's okay, because I had to, in the case of like Patrick, I had to write things down. But you know, why did I join Peace Corps? Maybe I'm the oldest of 6. Maybe I just wanted to get out of my house. That could have been one thing. I had been an exchange student in Brazil, and I certainly recognized that Brazil was very different than Connecticut, and maybe more fun than Connecticut. So there were things that I thought I would gain from being a Peace Corps volunteer, but unlike the volunteer of today, and I'm very, very lucky, as it was mentioned, that I've served as a Peace Corps director in 3 countries in different decades. And so I've seen why volunteers seem to be drawn to Peace Corps over a long period of time. You know, when I think about talking about my time with Peace Corps, I feel like saying to folks, you know, settle in. It's been 43 years since I was a volunteer, so I have a lot of time and territory to cover, to share with you. But I won't give you 43 years of it all, okay? But I think for me, it was something that I felt was going to stretch me. I wasn't positive how that was going to happen, but I knew it was going to stretch me. Now, there were certain things that I didn't really think about. One was that I was going to live in a dictatorship. The president had been president for 36 years, and that had influence on how we lived. If I was going to have more than 5 people at my meeting, then I had to ask permission from the police. And I would say, gee, I sure hope there's more than 5 people that come. But what happened is I asked for a blanket authorization to have these meetings. And I said, you know, come to any of them that you want. And if you feel that I'm trying to sort of stimulate revolution here, please let me know. The other thing was that I didn't realize that the Minister of Agriculture, and I was going to be an agriculture volunteer, that the Minister of Agriculture had said, you know, I don't want women volunteers. Now that message had not gotten to me. And so I arrived in Paraguay thinking that I was going to be an agriculture volunteer. Now to a certain degree, now, with reflection, pretty presumptuous on my part, very presumptuous on my part. I mean, I didn't know that, you know, chickens came anywhere but in packages at Giant, okay? And here I was going to go and work with farmers who had been farming for decades and decades. The other thing that I didn't really recognize was what isolation was going to be all about. I was going to be the first volunteer in this community, the first volunteer in this district, and my site was going to be 18 hours away by bus from the capital. And yet, the capital was where I was going to have to go for my mail and for my money. So important. The other thing, and it sort of tied to Patrick talking about his journal, I wrote letters. Now, the letters took about 3 months to get from my house to my house in the United States. And letters were, as my parents would say, they were somewhat disturbing, because I would write them over the course of a month, because I would go into the Capitol once a month to mail the letter. And I would start, I love this country. I love these people. I feel so at home. I'm doing great work. Then the next page was, I hate these people. I hate this town. I'm going to kill someone. They don't appreciate me. And my mother would say, we'd be go, oh. And she goes, and sometimes, Kate, you leave us kind of hanging here. Because the last is, I'm going in to mail the letter and maybe, like kill myself, right? And you never write back to say what happened, okay? And so, I use that as my way of communicating, but also it was for me a way to reflect on what was happening in my life. And interesting, my mother was beginning to, as she was getting older, to start to say, listen, who wants to get this silver? Who would like to get this piece of furniture? And also we were sitting around, she came out and she had this big garbage bag. And I said, well, clearly I haven't been around enough, okay? Because this is what I'm getting, is this bag, this garbage bag. I opened it up and it was every letter I wrote from the day that I left home to go to be into the Peace Corps until I came back. And in fact, in her mind, I'm sure, I didn't come back. Because when I finished Peace Corps, I ended up traveling around Latin America, and I went to visit my sister, who was serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador. So my father was feeling this country was this family was going to hell in a handbasket. They go to college, they go to Peace Corps. They go to college, they go to Peace Corps. And he, very different than today's world also. I called home and I said to my mother, I just got accepted to Peace Corps. Where are you going? I'm going to Paraguay. She hangs up. So I go, I'm not sure this is good news or this is bad news. Then I get a call about 15 minutes later, and it was clear to me that she had gone directly to the encyclopedia. And so I'm like, this is different than today's volunteer, right? So she went to the encyclopedia. Oh, yes. The city of Asuncion is the capital. So she was going on with how many people and the agricultural production. Now, again, very different than today. My parents never visited me. I mean, I think the airfare was something like $3,000 round trip. To get there, you made 7 stops between New York and Paraguay. So it wasn't something that you did like easily, okay? So again, I finished Peace Corps and I feel that, just as the other members have said, that there was a growth personally and professionally, and there was a contribution, but one thing that I would say that is a true gift, Peace Corps always talks about, you have an opportunity to plant seeds. You're working with young people, you're working with communities for 2 years. You don't really know what's going to happen. In my case, I got to go back probably just about every 2 years to visit my community. And just recently, a young woman who was 8 years old when I was a volunteer, who now is 109, right? But anyway, she came to the United States and she said, I'm not sure if I ever told you how much your presence in our community meant to us. And one of the things that I always say to volunteers that I work with is never underestimate who's watching you. Now sometimes that's that gets old. It gets very old, because you know that somebody's always watching you. But more than likely, it's going to be someone who is young. I used to call it, sort of the midget factor. That these little kids will be running around and they'd be watching you. And yeah, they'd be watching about, what you were teaching about this, that, or the other thing. But they're watching to see how you live, how you interact with people, how you respect people. And just the kinds of things that young people register that they don't even know they're registering. So here's this young woman who I meet 40 years later, and she said, I thought that the way that you spoke to men was incredibly interesting. Because in my sight, I was probably the first woman whoever had a friend that was a guy. All the other women from my community, they were either future husbands, you know, or they were sort of nothing. And I had the opportunity to have relationships with young men that really no other folks did. So I'll fast forward, and so, you know, I'll fast forward 40 years, more or less. And so, you know, from there, where did I go? And so, as was mentioned, I've worked with Peace Corps in many, many different places, and that has been a true gift. I think offering people the opportunity that I was given is a true gift. And I have found that there's certain common themes, if you will, that I have seen in my career. One is that I love working with young people. Now, at my age, just about everybody is a younger person, okay? But it allows me to always be challenged. It allows me to see the world as it currently is and not from, you know, a historical perspective. So I think youth is something that you see woven into my career, if you will. I think that you will also see that civil society or service has been part of my life. Working with AmeriCorps and working with national service has been just as rewarding as international service. And I think, as Kevin mentioned earlier, you know, national service, military service, international service, it's the commitment that you've made to serve, which is the most important. And everybody has to find their own place, whether it is, again, at your church, in your local community, coaching soccer, going to Peace Corps, or serving as a VISTA volunteer. I have a lot to thank Peace Corps for. As a Peace Corps volunteer, if you were not able to laugh at yourself, it was a long 2 years, a super long 2 years. Because A, people were laughing at you, okay? And B, you could not take yourself that seriously. And I think that's something that has served me well, because it allows me to, in some cases, diffuse situations that have maybe gotten a little heated, or to allow for laughter, which I believe is a medicine that we all should probably take more of. The next is humility. Again, a volunteer who is not humble also is going to have a really long 2 years, because you learn every single day what you don't know. And I feel that every day, and I have felt that every day since my Peace Corps experience. And I think the older you get, even more you feel that, you know, as you're in a world that's information overload, you know, your ability to keep up with it is really very, very challenging. But humility, you know, I think it was mentioned earlier, you know, I spent most of my first weeks, months in my town with people who were like 4 and under, or like, you know, 80 and above, okay? The young kids just kind of helping me with my language, because we were the same language level, okay? And the senior folks being very proud to share with me the history of this community that I was living in. And because I was the first Peace Corps volunteer ever to serve there, they were very intrigued by, and this was, again, 100 years ago, why would I go there? Why would I leave my home? And for most people, again, with no TV, no internet, no phone, really not leaving that community, they didn't know as much. You know, I was thinking about your comment in terms of, you know, them from TV, movies, and other things, sort of thinking they had an idea of what an American was like. The folks that I was working with had no idea. So their exposure to the outside world was so limited that I was sort of their eyes to the outside world, which was an amazing gift, but an amazing burden in terms of what it was that I was going to share. What were the values that I was going to share that would represent what I wanted them to think the United States and the United States people were all about. Resourcefulness. And this is sort of two things. You know, one is that, you know, you had nothing, and that seemed to be okay. You could make stuff out of nothing. And I think that was a skill that I learned. But I also think that I became mentally resourceful. I think that I became more mentally agile because so many times I thought I had a brilliant idea and it started to go south on me. And so I had to quickly think, how else can we approach this? How else can we do this? And I think that has been a gift that Peace Corps has given me that I've continued to use for years since. Need for community. I think it was mentioned earlier. I went into Peace Corps, I was with a group of 13 people. The only thing we had in common was that we were all in that Peace Corps group. That was it. I wouldn't have run into them at a bar, restaurant, community. I mean, we wouldn't have run into each other. But I became totally dependent on them, and we rode the Peace Corps, emotional roller coaster. And just as I was writing to my parents, I hate it, I love it, I hate it, they were seeing on a daily basis me saying, I hate it, I love it, I hate it. And so they helped me. And looking back 43 years, these people grew up with me, they grew old with me, they saw marriages, they saw divorces, they saw children being raised, and this bond that is totally amazing and I think extremely unique to Peace Corps, because your colleagues see you at your very, very best and they see you at your very, very worst. And that's something that we don't tend to do. We tend to hang around with people that are just like us. We tend to hang around with people who think just like us. That's pretty easy. But to be put into a situation where you think very, very differently and you have to survive, and not only survive, but support each other, that is a skill that I think we're all very well served in learning. How do you get challenged and inspired by people who think differently than you do? Meet people where they are. One of the things that many times Peace Corps volunteers, I would venture to say more now than when I was a volunteer, because when I went, they said, go forth, do something, and come back in 2 years. Now, not so much. We're visiting, we're having trainings, we're doing this, that, and the other thing. But many volunteers would say, I'm going to do X. I'm going to do Y. And you get there, and perhaps the community is really sort of interested in A and B. So how do you meet people where they are, appreciate where they are, and help them by empowering them? And when I talk about empowerment, I don't talk about power. I talk about removing the obstacles and the barriers that are in place, because most people have a great idea where they want to go. They have the intelligence to go where they want to go. But what they need is for the barriers and the obstacles to be taken away, and for the confidence that they need to go ahead and let their dreams play out really right in front of you. So the most important piece here is you're not the most important or the most intelligent person in the room at all times. I would say rarely. Rarely are you the most intelligent person, rarely the most important person. And so when you look around, it's your job to sort of figure out what each person that you're talking to has to offer to making you a better person, and that you have to offer to them to be a better person. People will never forget how you made them feel. I hope that all 4 of these sessions, all 4 of these presentations will make you feel inspired to kind of reflect on where you're going and what you're doing and how you can contribute to making this world a better place. And hopefully it will be through service. And maybe feel that you're needing to put yourself out there to be a little bit less comfortable, to be less in less comfortable territory. Okay. So here I am sitting with a group of volunteers. This was on the island of Grenada, and we had just got done talking about how, as a team, as a group, they had bonded. And I thank you for being here, because I believe that you're here to kind of listen to what the Peace Corps experience can bring to you as a professional and as a person. I hope that you feel that you've been inspired to kind of think about service, whether it's national, military, or international, but some way of giving back and yet getting from others. And that you will try to find a creative and innovative way to weave service into the life that you have now or the life that you'll have in a few years. So I thank you very much, and I thank Peace Corps for everything that they've given me.